So what better thing to do than talk to the Israeli government spokesperson, David Keyes. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
So just looking at the military situation, we had the military tit for tat a few days ago after the deal was ripped up. Is that now the end of it? Or are you expecting Iran to retaliate for the Israeli missiles that were fired at their positions in Syria?
Well, the latest barrage of 20 missiles that were fired at Israel was only the latest in a long series of aggressive, frankly outrageous maneuvers by Iran in an attempt to, as they say openly, destroy Israel. For decades they've been blowing up targets in the West, killing Jews, supporting genocidal terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah, and a few days ago launched 20 missiles at our citizens. Iran is a threat not just to Israel, but to the entire region. We see that since the deal was signed, Iran's aggression increased markedly, that it was devouring one nation after the other. And is an extremely dangerous regime. With the deal, without the deal, our opposition to it was very simple. It put Iran on a path to an arsenal of nuclear weapons in a few short years, the ability to enrich enough uranium for 100 nuclear weapons.
Even though
that's not good for Israel, that's not good for the region, that's not good for the world.
Okay, I will get onto the deal in a second, but the 20 missiles they fired incurred a much larger barrage of missiles that you fired, in which you killed 13 Iranian citizens, troops, I don't know what they were, on the ground in Syria. So, their response created a bigger response from you.
Well,
is that the way it works?
Iran has been moving its military about 1,000 miles westward with massive amounts of forces and massive amounts of arms, supporting people who openly call for Israel's annihilation, giving billions of dollars to groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and attempting to encircle Israel. You can imagine if you were an Israeli family looking out a little bit north and a little bit east, and you saw masses of Iranian forces gathering with the express purpose of annihilating your family and your state, you would be compelled to act as well. The proper way to respond to this is not to say, well, you shot one rocket, so we're going to shoot one rocket. The proper way to respond to it is to demand an end to Iran's expansion into Syria and its attempt to establish a military foothold in order to try to destroy the state of Israel.
Now, I can see why the world looks very different, or the neighborhood looks very different from where you're sitting to from where I'm sitting. But my question is whether that policy actually works, because what it might do is tease out the hardline, the even more hardline element in the Iranian government, mean that any sort of degree of interaction or reining them in is basically kaput, because they're now going to say to themselves, the only way we can make sure that we have some sort of security shield is if we do develop nuclear weapons.
Well, Iran's nuclear program goes back a very long time. Just a few days ago, we exposed over 100,000 secret files from documents and files from Iran's atomic archive, which proved one thing, that Iran desperately wanted nuclear weapons and had a comprehensive program to develop them. You twin that with the clear statements from Iran's leadership, parading missiles through the streets of Tehran saying, we will annihilate Israel, Israel will be eliminated. And you can understand, as you said, from where we sit, that's not a threat that we can take lightly. And, in terms of the response to the missiles, I think any state, certainly any democratic state, would do what is necessary to protect its civilians. I know that when Great Britain was under rocket fire, it responded in kind. We did the same thing, and we'll continue to defend our citizens.
But the inspection regime under the nuclear deal was working, by all accounts. I mean, not even President Trump claimed that it wasn't working. The inspectors went in, the centrifuges had been put on ice, and even if ultimately that is what Iran wants to do, for the time being, for the next 10, 15 years, it wasn't doing that. So why break that system if it was actually working?
Well, working is a strange word to describe the inspection regime. I'll explain why. First of all, the Iranian leadership said you cannot step foot in any military facility. Well, you don't have to be a nuclear scientist to figure out where Iran would undertake its secret activities. And that would be in the places that they don't allow any inspector to step foot in by their own accord. Second of all, there's all sorts of, really unbelievable things saying we have to give, several dozen days notice before you go in somewhere. They can say, no, you can't come in. Iran is a very large country. It is a sophisticated people. It is not hard to hide things in a country that big.
So you're saying that they were still doing this, they were still enriching uranium under our noses. Is that what you're saying?
That were so good failed to uncover an entire secret atomic archive with exact blueprints, with exact schematics, with exact files on how to develop a nuclear weapon. So if these inspections were so good, it wouldn't have taken Israeli intelligence. The inspectors themselves would have found this.
Are you then saying that the only real option here, and one that you're preparing for, is an all-out war with Iran that affects regime change in Tehran? Is that what you're going for here?
Well, Israel's hand is extended in peace to all of its neighbors. We don't want war with any of our neighbors. What we are doing is defending ourselves from an Iranian onslaught, missiles and bombs and terror that's been sustained against our people and our state now for decades. So we have no interest in war. We don't want war at all. Unfortunately, the Iranian regime's aims are expressly to wage war to annihilate Israel, and that's what they're doing. Sometimes patiently, sometimes covertly, sometimes overtly, but their intention has not changed at all.
But I don't understand what this
tragedy for the region.
But what does this current policy that you're adopting actually achieve? If you don't want regime change in Tehran, I mean, without wishing for it, if you don't have to do anything about it, you're going to end up with the same bunch of people in charge. They're going to be more upset than they were before. The hardliners will come to the fore. Any moderates will be squeezed out, and the situation for you will be worse, not better.
Well, who exactly are you calling a moderate? The Iranian regime is led by the supreme leader. He's not called the supreme leader for nothing. And this is a country which is jailing journalists, torturing dissidents, hanging gays from cranes in town squares, calling for the annihilation of Israel. If you expect Israel to sit by idly so that this so-called moderate regime will not become more extremist, thanks but no thanks. This is an extremely dangerous, extremely radical regime whose aims are not compatible with any semblance of civility in the modern world.
But so, how do you tease out? Okay, let's not argue about whether forget about the supreme leader, whether the president or not is moderate or not. How do you tease out the elements in Iranian society and Iranian government that Israel is prepared to live with? How can you do that with your current policy?
Well, Israel is prepared to live with the Iranian people, not the Iranian regime. Unfortunately, the biggest victims of this regime are their own people. We all saw the pictures of Neda Sultan being
yeah, but they need a government. Which government have you got in mind?
Well, how about a government that doesn't openly call for our annihilation? That would be a great start.
Yeah, but how do you bring that about? How do you actually do that? Do you think that an aggressive military policy towards them will tease out the more moderate, middle-of-the-road elements in Iranian society to run the country? That's my issue.
What you're calling an aggressive military policy, I would call a restrained policy in order to defend our citizens from annihilation. So a bit different nomenclature that I would use there. It's not up to Israel to decide who leads countries a few thousand miles away from it. What is necessary is that we look at reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. We wish that there was an Iranian leadership that was desirous of peace, whose hand was outstretched in peace, as is ours, who didn't call for our annihilation, who didn't attempt to gobble up the Middle East and impose theocratic dictatorship on this entire region. That would be a good start towards peace.
That sounds a bit like a Miss World acceptance speech. We all want world peace. Let's talk about practicalities. So my question again is this. Are you using this as a unique opportunity, together with the Saudis and President Trump, in order to start waging war against Iran because you need regime change in Tehran? Is that what this is about ultimately?
Ultimately, our interests are very simple. We may call it a Miss World speech, but we would like to live at peace with our neighbors. And the current regime, which is arming and funding terrorist organizations that seek genocide against Israel and openly calling for annihilation, is not compatible with peace. So what we hope is that there's a change in the approach of Iran. Israel has peace with Egypt because Egypt wants peace with Israel, and Israel has peace with Jordan because Jordan wants peace with Israel. Israel does not have peace with Iran because the Iranian leadership does not want peace with Israel. It is as simple as that.
But that peace with Jordan and Egypt only came about very slowly after a war involving both countries. Some time ago.
I hope it doesn't come to that, but that's entirely in the hands of the Iranian leadership, whether they continue to launch missiles at Israel. I think, as you can tell, our approach has been extremely restrained because we are surrounded by an Iranian regime, that are attempting to surround us, that are attempting to establish massive military forces right on our border. What would another democracy do if forces were gathering right on its border, whose express aim was the annihilation of that country? What would Britain do? What would America do? What would Canada do? What would any European country do? And I think the policy would be very similar. It would be to protect our people from this threat and always have our hand outstretched in peace for the moment that they are willing to accept that hand.
Okay, David Keyes, Israeli government spokesman, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme.